Howdy y'all, this is Los Man here, and I'm doing this little video here to mark the anniversary of one of the most famous horror movies ever released. That would be the 1980 slasher movie classic, Friday the 13th. Now, Friday the 13th was released 40 years ago on this day, which is May 9th, and it was directed by Sean Cunningham. Now, Friday the 13th as a franchise has established itself as one of the most successful horror movie franchises of all time, and it's definitely one of the most recognizable. The irony, though, is that the main character who's most associated with Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees, isn't really in the first movie. And if you're a fan of the movie, you'll know that. But that being said, what made Friday the 13th unique? Well, to be quite honest, and I'm going to be very blunt here, the movie wasn't unique. It was quite derivative. Even for its day in 1980, it was a slasher movie. And at the time, slasher movies had already established themselves as a new popular horror genre, most notably Halloween, which was released 2 years prior. Now, when Friday the 13th came out, it obviously came out at a time when slasher movies were becoming popular, and every studio wanted to cash in on, their own movie and their own unique take. Now, Friday the 13th itself was written by, I believe it was written and directed by Sean Cunningham. And it featured Betsy Palmer, Adrienne King, a young Kevin Bacon, who you'll definitely recognize. And you had Ari Lehman playing the Jason, who does appear in there, but not in the role that you would expect. I will say this about Friday the 13th. Despite the movie being, like I said, derivative, it's still an important film because what it does do is help establish a franchise that would go on to be one of the most popular franchises in movie history. You have summer camp setting, you have, generic teenagers, obviously not in their teens, and you do have kind of a whodunit scenario. Now remember, this is a movie that does not have an established villain on the cover, despite the fact that everyone recognizes Jason Voorhees as the villain. The first movie was a whodunit, kind of a 10 Little Indians scenario, where you have camp counselors being taken out, one at a time by a mysterious individual who's not quite happy that they're reopening the camp. I recall watching the movie back in the early 80s, and it was a scary movie. Pretty terrifying, had some great kills in it, and despite what I said about the movie, I was entertained by it. It definitely was a movie I enjoyed, and I still enjoy it to this day. I mean, I still watch, or I still rewatch Friday the 13th whenever I see it on, and, I like it. It's, you can enjoy a movie even though you know the formula, because, hey, you appreciate the significance of the movie, and given the fact that the name Friday the 13th was just such a perfect title for the movie, I mean, wow. I mean, you think about, the most important horror franchises. You have Halloween, you have Nightmare on Elm Street, you have Candyman, you have Hellraiser, you have Friday the 13th, and of course everybody associates that, with Jason Voorhees. Unfortunately, I don't have a Jason Voorhees mask or machete. All I have are movies, It's just what I do as I collect movies. Now, I do have a few other things. I've got some little Funko Pops around here somewhere. But going back to Friday the 13th, what I also appreciate about the movie was that, keep in mind that had this movie not received a sequel, I think it still would be a talked about movie. I mean, people would still, mention it. You look at a movie like The Burning, which never got a sequel or a remake, and that movie is considered one of the best slashers of the day, and which is probably one of the reasons why I think that it's a better movie than Friday the 13th, and if you haven't seen The Burning, you really should check it out because it really does a much better job of telling a scary, uh, you know, summer camp horror, type movie. It's actually a better movie than Friday the 13th, and it strangely has a better cast, and it's a more unique story, but you know what? It's still a great movie. What really did help Friday the 13th substantially was Friday the 13th Part 2. When the sequel was released a couple of years later, what made the movie stand out was that they gave Jason the opportunity to rise as the new villain, and that he did. You basically have Jason Voorhees appear as the villain, played by, I believe, Steve Miner. I think he plays him in that one. I'm recently deceased Steve Miner. Now, that particular movie would also be pretty successful, and that's another reason why you saw a sequel. Slasher movies in the early 80s made money. I mean, even the films that didn't do so well still made money. I mean, it just goes without saying that in the early 1980s, I mean, every week you had a new slasher movie being released practically every week. I mean, literally. I mean, I remember going to the drive-in with my sisters and checking out, what was the latest slasher movie of the week, and oh man, those were great days. Now, the movie was remade in 2009. This one right here, with I believe it was Derek Mears playing Jason in that particular role. Now, I actually do enjoy the remake, which is odd because I usually don't care for remakes, but I think it did a pretty good job. It had a great cast in it, and they at least did a pretty good job of retelling the story and making it, relatable, to a younger generation. Not that they needed it, but you know what? It happens. And I'm amazed that they didn't make another follow-up film to that, because I thought Derek Mears did a great job playing Jason. Granted, Kane Hodder is still my favorite Jason, but, he's always everyone's favorite Jason. Now, given that 40 years is, quite a big deal, for a franchise, it's notable to, look at the impact that Friday the 13th has made. You have Camp Crystal Lake is basically synonymous with, with Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees. You have pretty much movies like, The Burning, Mad Men, and Sleepaway Camp, and dozens of other, summer camp slashers that basically followed in the footsteps of Friday the 13th. Heck, I mean, what can be said more about Friday the 13th other than the fact that if Friday the 13th as a franchise didn't exist, we certainly would have had a much different 1980s. And, that being said, I know on, even though it's not Friday the 13th, it is important to take note of important anniversaries, and 40 years is a very good distinction for Friday the 13th as a franchise. So happy birthday, Friday the 13th, and I look forward to many more movies and many more memories.